Today we've got a crazy revenge story literally about freezing their neighbor. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. 4 years ago now, when I was 24, my mom died of breast cancer, and as both my grandmothers had also passed of it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out that I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. One, I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never turn, so I would just be getting these screenings for no reason. 2, I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they would need to keep an eye on the other one, so I would still need the regular checkups for the other breast. 3, I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for the bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mom and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring, but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge pink jagged scars on either side of my chest, each about 1 inch long and half an inch wide, and it caused me to go into severe depression, where it got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors, and getting physically sick looking at myself. I went to a therapist who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said that they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with and I might never get over it. And the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I will admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction, the plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural chest was an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller double D. Since then, my mental health has improved and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up, as has my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about these scars. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself. And they're now nicely hidden away and you can barely feel them. In the present day, I'm 28 years old and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was. My coworker Jill found out that I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing, when myself and my friend from years before the mastectomy were planning a holiday, and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants, and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and half a dozen people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months, Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to coworkers when I was in earshot, at one point saying that I had more plastic than Barbie, and calling me fake in 2 ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. I don't know what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the NHS. So I assume Jill thought that I'd got my chest done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS, but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom, where there weren't any cameras, and Jill just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when me, Jill, and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow, and Jill said, "You'd know all about being shallow," while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, "Do you know why I have these?" A few years ago, the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day, I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a jerk. I replied that Jill was being a jerk long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying that they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this was apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who had signed off on the email and I'd spoken to. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident on who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume that she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true, I was freaked. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract, and there was a part in the complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewers if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically, HR have asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face? And are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously. The 4 asks over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess as they'd happened on my break or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of the names who were there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went around everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one, but no big deal. This isn't exact words as there's 16 letters to sum up, but the gist was, my name is their name. I work with Jill last name and OP. On date at time, approximately, I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to OP as quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment, signed their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There's about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from the coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that wouldn't sit well with me as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer. And as I said this, I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by and said that she could be impartial. I replied that I didn't really mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stormed off to get a supervisor. Supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him I have it on good authority that Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." Supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the 4 of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint, and all 3 of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour and they kept asking me the same questions but phrased different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. They asked, "You said outside that you think Jill last name reported you. Why is this?" I reply, "Jill had an issue with me for about 3 months now. They ask, why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? I said, I had no issue with her. They ask, what issue does Jill have with you? I said, 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file, and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants but didn't know about the cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. They ask, why do you feel this is true? I said, here are 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office that I'd had breast implants on the day she found out and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it and rough dates and times. They ask, rough dates and times? I replied, no one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. They ask, what event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? I said, for me, harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent. But as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months, I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. They asked, have you had a conversation with Jill prior to this regarding her comments about you? I replied, several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time, I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making and would appreciate it if she were to stop. They asked, to your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? I said no, it wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because, frankly, it's none of her business, and I didn't feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. The supervisor stands up and says, well, I think we're done here. He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk, saying that I would hear from them after they reviewed the evidence. Letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by, and then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called in for a meeting with HR. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes and then come back, find a coworker, and they say that HR wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday are also called one by one and are each gone for about 10 minutes each. Some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30, it looks like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom had been interviewed. Then, finally, Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. 4:30-ish, Jill gets called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolls around. Everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time she packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from HR. My case is closed. I mean, I know HR has a process to follow and they kind of have to follow by the rules and whatnot, but surely everyone else in that room besides Debbie could clearly see the writing on the wall, right? I mean, my question is, how good of a friend could Jill possibly have been to any of these people for only 1/3 of the office to offer support to OP after the lunchroom breakdown? And according to what OP said, the rest tell OP that Jill was joking around and trying to downplay it and calling OP a jerk. Like somehow OP is the jerk? Yukichi Guy commented, "Paper trails are often the undoing of petty, vindictive people. I've seen it several times in my life, providing said paper trail usually, and it's always satisfying. This one was exceptionally satisfying. Bonus, you can now tell people that your breasts are so magnificent they get people fired. I mean, if you want to." Our next story is, don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding, or this might just happen to you. Last summer, I was at a cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both sides of the family. However, after the ceremony was over and the party had only just started, one of the bridesmaids decided to announce her own engagement. The attention was immediately taken away from the newlyweds and brought to the bridesmaid, who I'll call Sarah, and her equally smug fiancé. My cousin's wife, I'll call her Emma, didn't make a scene or utter a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she kept grinning and acted very happy for the other couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind no matter the consequences. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honor at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there for it, but my cousin sent me some of the best bits on Snapchat and explained the whole situation. This is where the fun begins. Emma's two much younger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the very last moment, Emma switched out the white petals in their baskets to blue ones she had secretly brought with her. She told her sisters not to say anything about it or let the bride see them until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. Sarah looked very confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't coordinate whatsoever with her theme, but of course, she didn't say anything about it in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were also Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on Emma's scheme. At the reception, Emma's sister and the other bridesmaids were tight-lipped when Sarah began demanding to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner ended up getting a lot of abuse for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen, displaying a loop of photos with Sarah and her husband, which had been compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen, and at first, she showed some pre-approved humorous photos of Emma with Sarah and some other friends to facilitate a couple lighthearted jokes. Then, at the very end, Emma said to Sarah that she must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white ones originally planned. That was when Emma displayed the last slide from her presentation. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant, and that she had just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals. The last slide, her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I sincerely regret watching the Snapchat recordings with headphones. Apparently, Sarah had been very nasty to her bridesmaids before, driving several of them away and forcing the others to pay ridiculous amounts of money for dresses. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother went to confront her outside, and Emma retorted with, "Gentle, gentle, I'm pregnant." I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to the majority of those bridesmaids anymore. I mean, all I can say is I gotta hand it to them. This is one of the most creative ways to get back at the absolute insanity it is to hijack somebody else's wedding and say, "We're getting engaged." Anonymous commented, and then at Emma's baby shower, Sarah flaunts that she's dying. And at Sarah's funeral, Emma announces that she ended her. And at Emma's trial, Sarah comes back as a zombie. Our next story is, I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried, and the thermostat was upstairs. Then the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth, and one day, she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman, and the noise was heck. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease stating that we were responsible for all utilities, period. meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking constantly. According to the landlord, she had quit for good when she signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7 and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and our belongings began to reek with smoke. We contacted the landlord because we had signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Freak you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with a demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s Fahrenheit all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes for your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my soak-long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off of a diet of hot liquids. And I turned off the freaking heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen crap hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's freaking freezing. Day 4, the landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I find it a little chilly in the house. I reply that I'd found all the cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the jerks upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's freaking leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis, and he lives in that freaking crappy house in the woods with all those jerk-biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems too good to be true. P.S. For those wondering, I did have a friend who worked plumbing stop by to give me some advice about how long I could go before I burst the water pipes to heck and back. I don't mean to be mean to OP, but anybody with a working brain could immediately see why the rent was so good on that place. Nobody else had moved in this duplex setup, and OP willfully signed on to be responsible for their gas, utilities, and water as well. I mean, shoot, I'll move in downstairs and I'll just live in the tub constantly refilling with water. It'll be on OP's tab anyways. Data laughing commented, I thought, wow, all utilities included? She's getting a pretty sweet deal. Right up until I remembered that you had all control over the thermostat. Shouldn't be legal to call a place its own apartment if you have no control over the temperature in said apartment. Endless King commented, shouldn't be legal to call a place non-smoking if the ventilation can be affected by cigarette smoke from an attached unit, but evidently it is. Our next story is, scammers want access to my PC. I turn the tables and start wiping their computer. Background, I got our home phone number long before cell phones were a common thing to have. As things have evolved, that phone number is a part of my history and is utilitarian to use for things I don't want ringing on my cell phone, like 99% of anything that requires a phone number for no good reason, so I've kept that phone number alive over the years. Most recently, I moved it a few years back to an online service that charges a tiny amount of money per month to host it for me. I access it via an SIP client on my computer. The story, because of the nature of the phone number, it randomly rings. If I have time to mess with whomever is calling, most of the calls are the "your car warranty is about to expire" kind. Some of the calls are about non-existent credit cards. My favorite calls are the scammers. I record all of the calls that come into this phone number. In my state, only one person needs to know that a call is being recorded. And besides, these scammers are all overseas, so I really don't care about their laws. So when a scammer calls, I tend to answer and play along. Sometimes these calls last a few minutes before they give up on me. Today, I set a new record, a total of 1 hour of their time wasted. The call comes in as normal. I string the guy along, I play dumb, I keep them thinking I'm an easy target. After 40 minutes, I tell him I have to hang up and could he call me back in an hour? To my surprise, this idiot calls me back, so I decide to see if I could get him to let me connect to him by continuing to play dumb. My plan is based on knowing that they have a handful of tools at their disposal, easiest of which is TeamViewer, so I play along until they get me on a TeamViewer. But I never give them the real information on my end, and I just ask for my partner ID. The idea is that with TeamViewer, you can switch who's showing the screen after you make the initial connection. I know that I have but a precious few seconds of time if I manage to get them to give me their ID and password to make my plan happen. So I have a dummy terminal set aside for all of this. I quickly write out my set of commands so I can copy them to my clipboard and launch them as soon as I get connected. Sure enough, they give me their ID and password. I'm ready and I strike. Paste the commands into a run window and let it rip. As I see the window pop up with a command prompt and the deletion of folders starts, the guy starts to stutter and asks, "What are you doing, sir?" I keep playing dumb until my connection is terminated. Files have been deleted. The scammer is ticked. He starts to curse at me. I eventually start taunting him and cursing back at him. After a while, he hangs up. Look, I know that they have cloned systems and they'll be back up and running in no time at all, but this wasted an hour of their time, and that is an hour they can't use to scam anyone else. I absolutely love it. In this day and age, you do see a lot of content out there of people who are totally messing with scammers, if not doing some kind of like Jim Browning thing where they try to like get them arrested or shut down. I think a lot of people out there have seen that Kit Boga clip with the scammer who is so irate because this clueless old lady, in air quotes, redeemed the gift cards they were going to give them for hundreds of dollars. Do not redeem! If you guys have any creative ideas about how you'd want to mess with scammers, I'd love to hear about those in the comments too. And also, on this actual Reddit post, OP uploaded the actual recording audio of that hour-long phone call. Getting Lucky commented, quoting a little bit from that audio, saying, "You are trying to be very smart." They said, "An hour of scamming a scammer is a pretty big investment. I didn't listen to the full file, but do you do anything while talking to them? Like watch TV, surf the web, etc.? OP responded commenting, "Work. I can fake being on a PC as well as they can scam. My work involves very little interaction with my coworkers and customers, so I can multitask." Our next story is, they tore up my grandfather's garden, he tore up their car. My dad told me this story a few years back. My grandfather lived in a really rural area in Georgia. This was around late 1930s, early 1940. My grandfather owned a farm and had a garden. He planted various veggies. Well, the only neighbors were about a mile away, and for some reason, the neighbors would drive their Model T through the garden, tearing up the veggies. My grandpa would have to replant the garden. The neighbors kept doing this, so here comes the revenge part. My grandfather dug holes around the garden and stuck metal poles into the holes. He covered the holes up with leaves. A few days later, the neighbors drove through again. My dad said they tore the undercarriage out and had parts strewn all over the place. He couldn't remember what happened after that, but I don't think they did that again. There really were absolute driving jerks even when cars first came around. I mean, I guess I haven't really thought too hard about it, but I'd love to hear kind of like the equivalent of back when pretty much everything was like horseback. "Sir, you can't park your horse there." Although I guess maybe it was probably a little bit more lawless in those days. It's not like they're gonna have somebody come out and tow the horse away. Anonymous commented, "I don't understand the mentality of people like that, especially during the Depression era. I cannot fathom why they would do that once, lest they do it repeatedly. They might have caused someone to starve. How freaking indecent do you have to be? Serves them right. I hope it took a long time to get driving again." OP responded commenting, "I do remember now that my dad said they were snooty, being one of the very few people there that had a car." Well, had a car. First 10 Amendments commented, "When I was a boy, we lived on a corner lot about 1 block from a fairly well-used back road. Someone thought it would be cute to skip the stop sign by driving through our yard. They did this only at night. My brother and I took it upon ourselves to pound some metal poles into the ground all around the perimeter of the yard. My brother excitedly woke me up in the middle of the night to inform me that we had gotten the culprit. Apparently, one of the poles went right through the radiator of the idiot's car. Nobody drove through the yard again, so we removed the poles. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.